Mhm.
Why do you think people associate the stigma of cheerleaders aren't nice and that whole thing?
I just think it comes from TV shows and movies and stuff, like, that's all you really see. I think most cheerleaders are, like, the most down to earth people ever, like, care about everyone in life and want everyone to succeed and want everyone to be better, but when you, like, watch a TV show or a movie or something, like, the cheerleader's never like that actually in person. It's always, like, they're the snuck up and rude ones and like the pretty rich girls and stuff. But like in all-star cheer and stuff, it's literally the biggest range of diversity, which is insane. I always used to think about how many different like kinds of people were on a team together, and I always have thought that was so cool.
So another stigma that I personally think is associated with, flying and, tumbling and being a
Mhm.
cheerleader and, being on the sidelines looking cute because like y'all always look cute. Do you think there's ever been a point in your life where you've struggled with your own body image because of that?
um for sure. I'm trying to think of when it really first started. I mean, as a little kid, I don't think you ever really think about it. Um, but I always grew up flying, like my entire life, all through high school. I literally stopped flying when I came to college because of kind of the way I would try to make myself so I could be a flyer. Like when I went into high school and I went through puberty and stuff, I gained weight like any normal person ever would.
Mhm.
And I would literally try to make myself like I was 17 years old trying to make myself look like the 12-year-olds on flyers on my team because I was the oldest flyer on the team and I was obviously the biggest because I'm the oldest.
Yeah.
And so I would literally try to make myself look like the 12-year-olds, which obviously does not work because I've gone through puberty. I'm a woman and I'm looking at like toddlers literally that are so small. And I think that was always the biggest thing was like comparing myself to the littlest kid on the team and being like, I want to look like that. I don't want to like be a struggle to lift or anything. Like, and that's how I would think about it. I'd be like, I don't want to be too big for my bases to base me. I wouldn't like want to make them struggle more. I want to make their job as easy as possible.
Were you ever like bullied by your bases or maybe one of your coaches that you can think of for being heavier?
I wouldn't ever say I was like bullied. I mean, like, none of my bases would like have ever been like, oh my God, you're so heavy. It's actually like, which sounds weird. It's the opposite. It's like they base you and they're like, oh my God, you are not as heavy as I thought you were going to be. And
What?
you're just like, oh, okay.
Oh my
You're
God.
just like, oh. So I look fat, but I'm not fat. And then I think that is one thing, which I mean, obviously it's nice to hear that you're not heavy, like, but when you think about it later, you're like, you obviously thought I was going to be heavy for some reason. Um, but with coaching, it was never like, I mean, obviously it's not really the words, it's more what happens. So like I said, I flew my entire life and then my sophomore year, um, they put me as a base and I was like, obviously I'm not flying because I am too big. Like, so it was never like, oh, Tayler, you're fat, we're not putting you in the air. It was like, you're basing, and I'd be like, why am I basing? And then you just know you're just too big to fly, or else you would be flying.
So, I mean, number that just like, I mean, not that it bothers me, but like that's crazy that that's just how it is. But I
Mhm.
mean, it won't change. Do you think that there could be like a movement within the industry to change that? Or do you think it's just like, this is how it is, this is how it will always be, and that's that?
Well, it's weird. It's kind of the opposite. Like back in the day, they used to have like girls that are back spots now
Mhm.
flying. And the reason was because they never did what we do now. And that's what I tried to understand like when I was in high school.
Yeah.
Cheerleading just isn't the same. You're doing every single year, putting up the caliber. One team will do this, and then that becomes the norm for everyone. So in order to do these insane skills that we're doing, like you cannot have like girls that used to fly. Like there's just no
Right.
it's not that it's not possible, it's just harder. So it's just easier for them to put little 12-year-old girls on the team to lift rather than lifting 18, 19-year-olds.
Mhm.
Um, so that kind of happened a few years ago, but it just came with the evolution of cheerleading. Like cheers getting harder, the stunts are getting harder, so it's harder for the boys or the girls to lift you. Like, so it's just easier for them to have little flyers, which I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. Is I grew up cheering my whole life. So if you started cheering when you were 15 and you were a flyer this year and then you're not a flyer this year, it's might not even be because you're big. Like, it's just because someone is littler and it's going to be a little bit easier, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's the biggest thing is realizing that just because you don't fly anymore doesn't mean that it's because you're too big. It might just be because cheerleading's changing. Like, it's just easier to do it with the 12-year-old that weighs 90 pounds than a girl that weighs 115.
Definitely. What advice do you have for maybe the little girl who will watch this and be like, well, I've always wanted to fly. And, maybe, I don't want to say maybe she's a little bit on the heavier side, but maybe she's a little bit more developed and maybe she has a little bit more curves, which is
Mhm.
great. Like, what advice would you give her?
I would definitely just say that from my experience, flying is not everything. It's fun and you're in the air and it's a little bit easier than basing is.
Mhm.
But like, I've never been happier than I have being at Navarro and not having to worry about the stress of thinking about my body and making sure that like I'm health skinny enough to be lifted. And it's just like such a weight off your shoulders, not even having to worry about any of that. Plus, not having to worry about the fact that everyone's eyes are on you. Um, so it really just is like embrace your role on the team. Every single person is important. Like, a base is just as important as a flyer. A back spot is just as important as a flyer. A tumbler is just as important. So it's really about just embracing what your role is on the team.